His lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words. Just 5. I couldn't hear them from where I sat, but I saw what they did to Vincent Mercer's face. The color drained out of him, and the confident half-smile he wore so easily finally broke. The papers in front of him trembled. He tried to steady them with both hands, but his fingers were shaking anyway. Across the aisle, his mother sat rigid and furious, lips pressed tight, eyes narrowed as if she could bully the truth into changing. A few rows behind them, the young woman Vincent had been showing off lately shifted in her seat, suddenly unsure of where to put her hands, her bright blouse looking out of place in a courtroom built for gray suits and quiet endings. And me? For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. Not a big smile, not the kind you flash for photographs, just a small, private curve at the corner of my mouth. What happens when something heavy finally begins to lift? 3 months earlier, I was still Vincent's wife. 15 years of marriage, long enough to build a life, long enough to grow used to a person's footsteps on the stairs, long enough to confuse routine with safety, long enough to think, even when things turned cold, that the warmth would come back if I worked a little harder. My name is Alexis Dunst. I'm 38 years old, and for a long time I thought I understood what love looked like. I thought it looked like sacrificing quietly. I thought it looked like being the steady one while someone else chased the spotlight. I didn't grow up with money. I grew up with rules. Don't make a scene, don't ask for too much, keep the house respectable. My parents were good people, but they were tired people. When I was 20, I was practical and motivated and, if I'm being honest, eager to get out of my parents' home and into a life that felt like my own. That's how I ended up at Henderson and Price Law Firm, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and strong coffee. I started as a file clerk, carrying boxes, making copies, smiling politely when someone forgot my name. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady felt like security. Vincent came in on a rainy afternoon. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a client, young, handsome in a polished way and bursting with plans. He talked about real estate like it was destiny. He used words like portfolio and development and empire, and he said them with the kind of certainty that makes you want to believe. He noticed me. He asked my name. He remembered it the next time. He brought me a coffee and acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world that our paths had crossed. At 20, I mistook that attention for something solid. When he talked about the future, he talked as if I belonged in it. We married. I kept working part-time while we built a home. We had a son, Tyler, and suddenly time moved in grocery lists and school calendars. Still, I kept saving. I built up my 401k. I tucked away every spare dollar the way my grandmother taught me. My grandmother used to say, "A woman should have her own money, not because she's planning to leave, but because life changes the rules without warning." When I was young, I thought she was being cautious. Later, I understood she was being kind. Vincent's business grew. The dream got louder. He needed help. Just until we hire someone, he said. He needed someone he could trust with the numbers and the paperwork and the endless phone calls. Someone like me. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, scheduler. The person who knew which contractor lied, which inspector needed reminders, which clients demanded answers within the hour. Vincent had the title and the speeches at parties. Vincent had the handshakes and the grin. I had the work. For 11 years, I poured myself into building his dream while trying to keep my own small corners of stability intact. I told myself it was what married people did. I told myself love meant sacrifice. I told myself I was lucky because Tyler had good schools and we had a house, and Vincent still kissed me on the cheek before leaving in the morning. Then the shifts started. He began making decisions without telling me. He stayed late more often. He guarded his phone like it was a safe. He criticized me in ways that sounded like jokes to anyone else. Little barbs about my looks, my lack of ambition. If I flinched, he'd say, "I'm just being honest," as if honesty gave him permission to wound. And then, 3 months ago, he dropped the bomb with all the emotion of a man ordering dinner. It was a Tuesday. I was at the stove, stirring sauce, Tyler's backpack by the door. Vincent walked in, set his briefcase down, and said, I want a divorce. No warning, no conversation. No attempt to soften the edges. He told me he wanted the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Tyler, he added, like our son was a burden he didn't feel like carrying, like he was doing me a favor. In that moment, something inside me went very still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at him and realized I didn't know the man standing in my kitchen. Or maybe I did, and I'd simply been refusing to see him clearly. That night, after Tyler went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the house settle. I thought about the vows we'd said, and about how many women my age have learned too late that love and paperwork are not the same thing. Then the old part of me, the file clerk who once labeled boxes and tracked signatures for a living, woke up. I started gathering documents, mortgage statements, bank records, company folders, anything with a date and a number. I didn't have a plan yet. I just knew I needed the truth, and I could feel Vincent trying to rush me past it. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was that Vincent wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to hand me an ending, and I wasn't going to accept it. When people hear 15-year marriage, they picture anniversaries and family photos, maybe a few hard seasons softened by time. What they don't picture is how quietly a life can be rearranged until you're living inside someone else's story. After Vincent said the word divorce, I kept replaying our past like a film I'd watched too many times. Not because I missed him in that moment. I didn't. I replayed it because I needed to understand where I'd been led, step by step, into a place where a man could look at the woman who built his life with him and say, I want everything. In the beginning, Vincent wasn't cruel. That's the part that confuses people. They think cruelty comes in with sirens, loud and obvious. But in my experience, it comes in as charm, as confidence, as promises you want to believe because you're young and you're tired of being careful. Our first apartment was small. We had mismatched dishes and a couch Vincent bought used from a coworker. I worked at the firm, and he worked like a man trying to outrun poverty. He'd come home smelling like cologne and construction dust, and he'd talk about future properties the way other men talk about fishing trips, bright-eyed, certain, full of big gestures. He liked to say, I'm doing this for us. And back then, I believed him. When Tyler was born, everything sharpened. A baby does that. Suddenly you're measuring time in feedings and sleep and pediatric appointments, and you're trying to keep your head above water while the world keeps moving like nothing changed. Vincent's business grew quickly around then. He had a gift for selling confidence. He could walk into a room and make people feel like they were lucky to meet him. He made friends with lenders, with investors, with realtors who liked their deals fast and their paperwork flexible. And at first I didn't question it because I didn't know what I didn't know. He'd bring home binders and envelopes and say, I need your help, Lex. Just for a little while, he told me, just until he hired someone. Just until he got to the next level. I've learned that just is one of the most dangerous words in marriage. It sounds small, it sounds temporary, but it can swallow years if you aren't paying attention. So I started helping. I made spreadsheets at the kitchen table while Tyler slept. I filed receipts, tracked invoices, reconciled bank statements. I answered calls while stirring oatmeal. I learned who paid late and who needed gentle reminders. I remembered birthdays for clients, sent holiday cards, scheduled inspections, confirmed appointments, soothed angry tenants, and kept Vincent from having to deal with the parts of business that weren't glamorous. If you've ever run a household, you know the truth. The work that keeps life running is mostly invisible. People notice when it isn't done, not when it is. The house is clean, so no one says a word. The bills are paid, so no one asks how. The child is fed, so no one wonders who cooked. And in business, it's the same. Vincent's name was on the company sign, but my hands were in the engine every day. There's a reason so many older women will lean in and say, honey, protect yourself. It's not bitterness, it's memory. We've watched too many women pour everything into a marriage or a family business and end up with nothing but exhaustion and a box of old paperwork. The world has improved in some ways, but the pattern still repeats. Many women's labor, especially in family businesses, never appears on payroll. It doesn't build Social Security credits. It doesn't grow retirement accounts. It doesn't look like a career on paper. It looks like love, and that's how it traps you. Vincent started traveling more. Networking, he'd say. He started dressing sharper, wearing watches he didn't need, shoes that cost more than my first month's rent. He'd post photos on social media with captions like "Grind never stops," and people would comment with applause and fire emojis, like ambition was a religion and he was the preacher. Meanwhile, I was the one packing Tyler's lunches and making sure the gas bill was paid. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself we were a team. I told myself I had a role, and it mattered, even if no one clapped for it. But small things began to shift. When I asked about money, Vincent would say, "Don't worry about it, I've got it handled." When I asked to see the business accounts, he'd laugh and say, "You don't need that stress." It was always framed as care, like he was protecting me from worry. But protection can be another form of control when it comes with secrecy. He also began rewriting our story in public. At parties, he'd introduce me as my wife, and then talk for 20 minutes about his achievements. If someone asked what I did, he'd say, "Oh, Alexis helps out," in the same tone you'd use for a hobby. Like the work that kept his business from collapsing was just me being sweet. I remember one dinner, an investor, his wife, and a couple of realtors. I made a roast, set the table, kept Tyler entertained, and listened while Vincent described himself as a self-made man. Self-made. I stared at my plate and wondered when exactly I had become invisible in my own life. And then came Lorraine, Vincent's mother. Lorraine had always been sharp, but she used to keep it sheathed. She'd bring casseroles when Tyler was sick. She'd compliment the house. She'd say things like, "You're good for my son." Over time, her compliments turned into inspections. She'd run a finger along a windowsill and raise her eyebrows. She'd comment on my weight, my clothes, my attitude, and Vincent began siding with her in little ways. If she criticized, he didn't defend me. If she hinted I wasn't enough, he didn't correct her. That's the thing about disrespect. It grows in whatever silence you feed it. I tried talking to Vincent. I tried doing what people tell you to do, communicate. But he'd sigh, roll his eyes, and say, "You're being dramatic." If I cried, he'd say, "Here we go again." If I got angry, he'd smile like I'd proven his point. And little by little, I stopped trying. Not because I didn't care, but because you can't reason with someone who enjoys making you feel small. Tyler was around 10 when I first noticed Vincent's attention drifting in a way that wasn't just about work. He'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. He'd take calls outside. He'd start arguments over nothing, like he was trying to justify being distant. I didn't confront him at first. I wasn't ready to look straight at what I suspected. Denial can feel like peace when the truth feels like an earthquake. Instead, I did what I've always done. I watched. I listened. I gathered information quietly, the way I learned in that law office years ago. Because even when you don't want to fight, you still need facts. That was when I started noticing the numbers. Not the big ones Vincent liked to brag about: purchase prices, sale profits, net worth. I noticed the small ones: late fees, odd transfers, interest charges that didn't match what he claimed, new accounts I didn't recognize, the kind of financial fingerprints that tell a story if you know how to read them. One evening, while Vincent was working late, I opened a folder he'd left on the desk. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself I was just tidying. Inside were loan documents, several, not just mortgages on properties, personal guarantees, lines of credit, and something else that made my stomach go cold, a notice about a payment that had been missed. I sat there in the quiet house with the paper in my hands, and I realized the life Vincent presented to the world might be built on something unstable. And if it was unstable, then the divorce wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. Because a man who is truly wealthy doesn't need to strip the mother of his child down to nothing, but a man who is afraid of what's coming due, might do exactly that. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the old refrigerator hum like a clock counting down. And sometime around 3 in the morning, I stopped asking myself why Vincent had changed. I started asking a different question. What was Vincent hiding? When you've lived with someone long enough, you learn the sound of their lies before you learn the words. With Vincent, the lies came dressed as impatience. He'd speak faster, as if speed could make his version of the story more true. He'd use the same phrases over and over. It's simple. Don't complicate it. We'll handle it like adults. And he'd say them as if I was the one creating chaos, not him. A week after he announced the divorce, he sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a pen he'd probably taken from a closing. He slid the documents toward me like a waiter setting down a check. "Sign," he said. I glanced at the first page and saw language I didn't like. Phrases about full and final settlement, about waiving claims, about relinquishing rights. It was written to sound clean and reasonable. That's how traps are built. They don't look like traps. They look like choices you're supposed to make quickly. "I need to read this," I said. Vincent exhaled like I'd offended him. "Alexis, there's nothing to read. You don't understand this stuff." I stared at him. For more than a decade, I had kept his business running. I had tracked his payments and called his contractors and cleaned up his mistakes. I might not have been the one shaking hands at parties, but I understood numbers. I understood paperwork. And I understood when someone wanted me ignorant. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said. That was the first time his mask slipped all the way. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and he leaned forward as if he could intimidate me into obedience. "You're going to make this hard," he said quietly. And there it was, not sadness, not regret. Just a threat, delivered like a fact. The next day, Lorraine arrived. She didn't call first. Lorraine never called first when she wanted power. She showed up like she owned the place, wearing pearls and the kind of perfume that fills a room before a person speaks. She walked in, looked around the kitchen, and smiled in that tight, satisfied way. "So," she said, "this is what you've come to." I didn't offer her coffee. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood at my own counter and waited. Lorraine folded her hands. "Vincent tells me you're refusing to be reasonable." "Reasonable," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yes," she said as if she was talking to a child. "You've had a nice life, Alexis. You should be grateful, but you can't expect to take what you didn't build." That sentence did something to me. It took me back through 15 years of late nights, through meals served cold because a contractor called, through birthdays planned while Vincent worked, through the quiet labor of being the person who made sure everything didn't fall apart. "I built plenty," I said. "I'm just not on the brochure." Lorraine's smile faded. "Don't be cute. Vincent is offering you a generous arrangement. You get to keep the boy." That should be enough. It was the way she said "the boy" that made my stomach knot. Tyler wasn't a suitcase to be handed off. He was my child, a person with a heartbeat and fears and dreams. And hearing my son reduced to a bargaining chip told me exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. When Lorraine left, she paused at the door and turned back. "You should remember your place," she said. After she walked out, I stood in the quiet and listened to my own breathing. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I got angry, not the loud kind of anger that gets dismissed as hysteria, the quiet kind that makes a person focus, the kind that has carried women through generations of being underestimated. That same week, Vincent's new life stopped being a rumor and became a presence. I came home from picking Tyler up from school and found a young woman sitting in my living room like she belonged there. She was pretty in the way youth can be pretty. Smooth skin, bright eyes, carefully styled hair. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, standing. "You must be Alexis." I didn't answer right away. I looked at Vincent. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked almost proud, as if this was a performance. "This is Brittany," he said. "She's going to be around. Going to be around. In my home. Around my child." Brittany tilted her head. "Vincent says you're being difficult," she said like she was commenting on the weather. I could feel Tyler beside me, stiff and silent, trying to understand what was happening without anyone explaining it. That's what adults do to children during divorce. They expect kids to absorb emotional earthquakes quietly. I turned to Vincent. "Not in front of Tyler," I said. Vincent shrugged. "He needs to get used to it." That was when I knew there would be no mercy from him. And when I realized there would be no mercy, I stopped expecting it. Expectation is what keeps you vulnerable. The pressure escalated fast after that. Vincent cut off access to some accounts. He began returning my calls through his lawyer. He started moving money around in ways that left the household short. When I asked for help with Tyler's school fees, he sent a message that said, "Budget better." Older women watching this might understand what it feels like when a man uses finances as punishment. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to pay the bill he always paid, letting the late notices arrive, letting you scramble, and then accusing you of incompetence when you struggle. One afternoon, I opened the garage and found boxes, my boxes. My clothes, my books, my wedding keepsakes, tossed together like trash. Some were literally in black garbage bags, the kind you use for yard waste. I stood there with my hands shaking, staring at the life I'd built being treated like something disposable. That night I called Diane. Diane had been my friend since before Tyler was born. She'd been the one I sat with at playdates, the one who held my hand when my father died, the one who used to say, "You two are solid." When she answered, her voice was careful. "Hey," she said, "how are you holding up?" I told her what happened. The boxes, Brittany, Lorraine, the papers Vincent wanted me to sign. I told her I felt like I was being erased. There was a pause on the line, a long one. "Alexis," she said softly, "maybe you should just take what he's offering. Vincent can be intense. Lorraine can make things worse." It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like pressure, and I felt something cold slide into place. "Diane," I asked, "have you talked to Vincent?" Another pause. Then, "He just asked how you were. He's worried about Tyler." Worried about Tyler. That was what they all said when they wanted to look noble while doing something cruel. I ended the call politely, but when I set the phone down, I knew I was alone in a way I hadn't been before. The people you think are yours sometimes belong to the person with more power. It's a hard lesson, but it's an honest one. Tyler began changing too, not because he wanted to, because he was being pulled. Vincent started picking him up unexpectedly, taking him to expensive dinners, buying him things Vincent had never bothered with before. Tyler would come home with a new hoodie, a new game, a story about a fancy restaurant. At first, Tyler looked excited. Then, gradually, he started looking confused. Children aren't stupid. They notice when affection is a strategy. One evening, Tyler sat at the table while I sorted mail, late notices, legal letters, bank statements that didn't match what Vincent claimed. He watched me quietly for a long time. "Mom," he said finally, "did you do something bad?" That question hit like a punch, because it told me Vincent was shaping the story, and Tyler was trying to make sense of adult ugliness by blaming the safest person in the room, me. I set the mail down and reached for his hand. "No," I said gently, "I didn't do anything bad." "Dad says you're trying to take his money," Tyler whispered. I took a slow breath. "Your dad and I are separating," I said, "and sometimes grown-ups say things when they're scared." "But this isn't about you, and it's not your job to fix it." Tyler swallowed hard. "Are we going to lose the house?" I looked around the kitchen, the place I'd cooked thousands of meals, the place Vincent had stood when he announced our divorce like it was a business decision. I wanted to promise Tyler we'd never lose anything, but promises without facts are just comfort, and comfort doesn't pay bills. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I do know this. You and I are going to be okay." That night, after Tyler went to bed, I sat at the same table and pulled out the documents I'd been gathering. Loan notices, transfers, accounts. I stopped seeing them as random problems and started seeing them as a map of what Vincent had built and what he was trying to hide inside the divorce. And then it hit me, clear as day. Vincent wasn't only trying to leave me with nothing, he was trying to leave me holding the wrong thing. He wanted me to walk away quietly so I wouldn't ask questions. He wanted me desperate so I'd sign whatever he put in front of me. He wanted me emotional so I'd look unreasonable. I wiped my eyes not because I was broken, but because I was done grieving a man who no longer existed. Then I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth. The first lawyer I met with wore a crisp suit and spoke the way people do when they've seen too many families fall apart. Calm, practiced, careful not to promise miracles. Her name was Nina Patel. She wasn't warm in the way some people expect a woman to be, but she was steady, and steadiness is what I needed. She listened while I explained everything, the divorce announcement, the rushed papers, Lorraine's visit, Brittany in my living room, the money suddenly tight, the boxes in garbage bags, the way Tyler had started asking questions no child should have to ask. Nina didn't gasp or shake her head or say, "How awful," the way friends do when they want you to feel heard. She nodded at the right places, wrote notes in clean handwriting, and then she looked up. "Do you have documents?" she asked. I slid a folder across her desk. I'd brought bank statements, loan notices, copies of anything I'd managed to gather without Vincent noticing. The papers weren't neat. Some had coffee stains. Some were wrinkled from being pulled out quickly and hidden. Nina flipped through them slowly. Her eyes narrowed the way a nurse's eyes narrow when she sees an odd symptom. "This," she said, tapping a page, "is interesting." It was a notice from a lender about a missed payment. Nothing dramatic. No bright red sirens. Just a quiet letter that to most people might have looked like a minor inconvenience. To Nina, it looked like a crack in a foundation. "Vincent says he's doing well," I told her. "He acts like he's rich. He's always talking about properties, investments, future deals." Nina set the page down. "People who are stable don't usually rush their spouse to sign away rights," she said. "They also don't usually hide accounts." My stomach tightened. "So what does it mean?" "It means," she said, "we don't assume anything. We verify." That sentence felt like someone handing me a flashlight in a dark hallway. Nina explained the process in plain terms. Divorce, she told me, is rarely just about feelings. It's about records. It's about what can be proven. It's about what exists on paper, not what someone claims at a dinner party. And if one spouse has been controlling the money, the other spouse has to become a detective whether they want to or not. I didn't tell her right away that I'd been doing just that, because there was something I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even Diane. Something that started 3 years earlier, long before Vincent said the word divorce. 3 years ago, Vincent came home late, smelling like whiskey and impatience, and tossed his briefcase on the floor. He was angry at someone, an investor, a contractor, the bank. It changed depending on the day. He stormed into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and then slammed it shut as if the refrigerator had personally betrayed him. I was at the table, balancing the checkbook and sorting company receipts the way I often did. Vincent paced behind me, muttering about idiots and delays. Then, without warning, he snatched a folder from the counter. "Stop poking around in my business," he snapped. "My business," he said, "not ours, not the company we'd built with my unpaid labor and his ambition, his." I remember looking up at him, not frightened, but startled. That kind of possessiveness had been creeping in for a while, but that night it was naked. After he went upstairs, I sat in the quiet and stared at the empty spot on the counter where the folder had been. I should have let it go. A younger version of me probably would have. I would have told myself it wasn't worth a fight. But that night, the file clerk part of me, the part trained to notice what people don't want noticed, woke up fully. The next morning, while Vincent was out, I went into the office closet where he kept older documents. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for a pattern, something that explained why a man who appeared to be thriving could be so defensive about his paperwork. I found it in a stack of loan agreements. Not one, several. Some were tied to properties I recognized. Some were tied to entities I didn't. The names were similar, LLCs with neat, respectable titles, but the addresses didn't match our usual projects, and there were personal guarantees attached to them. Vincent's signature over and over, promising repayment with his own assets if the companies failed. I sat on the floor with the papers spread around me and realized something that made my skin go cold. Vincent's empire wasn't built on wealth, it was built on borrowing. Borrowing isn't always bad. Plenty of businesses use debt responsibly, but what I saw wasn't clean, strategic borrowing. It was layered, messy, and aggressive, like stacking plates higher and higher while insisting they'd never wobble. I didn't confront him then. I didn't even mention what I'd found. Instead, I started quietly paying attention. I watched the accounts. I noted dates. I tracked transfers the way you might track symptoms when you suspect an illness but don't yet have a diagnosis. That was the beginning of my 3 years of preparation, years I didn't know would become preparation until later. Back in Nina's office, I took a slow breath and told her, "There's more," I said. "I've been noticing things for a while." Nina leaned back. "Tell me." So I did. I told her about the loan documents, about the weird transfers, about the late fees that didn't match Vincent's success, about how he'd started guarding his phone and rewriting our story in public while the numbers behind the curtain looked shaky. When I finished, Nina nodded once, like a judge deciding what comes next. "I want to bring in a forensic accountant," she said, "someone who can trace this properly." 2 days later, I sat across from a man named Harold Klein in a small conference room. Harold looked like someone who had lived inside spreadsheets for so long he could probably hear lies in the rhythm of a bank statement. He was polite, older, and direct. He asked me questions I hadn't even thought to ask myself. How many accounts? Which ones were joint? Who had access? Had Vincent ever asked me to sign anything for the business? Did I recognize certain company names? Did I know if he'd been investing in anything risky? I answered carefully, and every answer felt like placing another piece into a puzzle I'd been forced to solve to protect my child. Over the next few weeks, the truth arrived in layers. It turned out Vincent had created multiple LLCs, more than he ever mentioned. Some held property, some held loans, some appeared to exist mainly to move money around. Harold traced payments that went out one day and came back under a different name the next. He found balances Vincent hadn't disclosed. He found credit lines that were maxed out. He found interest payments that suggested desperation, not confidence. And then Harold found something that made my hands go numb. A property. Not in our name. Not in the company's name. In an entity I'd never heard of, with an address that wasn't a construction site or a rental. It was an apartment. A private apartment. When Harold said it, Nina watched my face carefully, as if she expected tears. But the truth is, I didn't cry. Not then. The part of me that might have cried had been bleeding slowly for years. By the time the wound was named, I was already scarred. I thought of Brittany in my living room, smiling like she owned the place. I thought of Vincent's cologne mixed with unfamiliar perfume. I thought of Lorraine telling me I didn't build anything, and I understood what that apartment was. It wasn't just a place. It was a symbol. A second life funded by a financial structure that was already cracking. When I got home that evening, Tyler was doing homework at the table. He looked up and asked, "Did you talk to the lawyer again?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice even. "Is Dad going to take the house?" he asked. His eyes were too old for his face. I sat beside him. "Listen to me," I said softly. "I'm working on making sure you're safe. That's my job." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Kids can sense uncertainty the way dogs sense storms. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone with the documents spread out like an autopsy. And something else became clear, something Nina and Harold confirmed with quiet certainty. If Vincent was drowning in debt, the divorce wasn't simply about punishing me, it was about protecting himself. He wanted the house, the cars, the business, everything, because he wanted to control the assets that still looked valuable. He wanted me to walk away with as little as possible so I wouldn't examine the foundation, and he wanted the divorce done quickly because time was not on his side. I stared at a loan statement and heard my grandmother's voice like she was sitting beside me. A woman should have her own money. Life changes the rules without warning. I realized then that my goal wasn't to win in the way people imagine. Some dramatic moment of revenge. My goal was to keep Vincent from writing the ending. Because if I signed what he put in front of me, I wouldn't just be poor. I might be responsible. Debt has a way of attaching itself to whoever is closest when the music stops. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped trying to fight him head on. Instead, I started planning to let him do what arrogant people always do when they think they're untouchable. I started planning to let him take what he insisted on taking. And I started planning, quietly and carefully, to make sure that when he finally grabbed the crown he wanted so badly, he would also inherit the weight that came with it. There is a kind of strength that looks like surrender. People misunderstand it all the time. They think if you're not yelling, you must be weak. If you're not crying in public, you must not care. If you're not fighting the way movies teach us to fight, then you must be losing. I let them think that. I let Vincent think that most of all. After Nina and Harold laid the facts out on the table, after the private apartment, the layered loans, the maxed-out credit lines, the strange transfers, my body reacted in a way I didn't expect. Not panic, not hysteria, a quiet clarity, almost like relief, because confusion is exhausting. Knowing the truth, even an ugly truth, can be a strange comfort. Nina told me very plainly, we can't rely on his honesty. We rely on documentation. So that became my religion. Documentation, dates, signatures, paper trails. Vincent, meanwhile, had his own religion. Appearances. He wanted a fast divorce. He wanted it clean. He wanted to walk out looking like the successful man who had simply outgrown his marriage. He wanted me to look unstable, emotional, greedy, and unreasonable so that anything I questioned could be dismissed as bitterness. When you're dealing with someone like that, you don't beat them by arguing. You beat them by letting them talk themselves into a corner while you keep your hands steady. At the first mediation meeting, Vincent arrived in an expensive suit and shook hands like he was greeting admirers. Lorraine sat beside him, posture sharp as a ruler. Brittany wasn't there that day, but her absence still felt like a shadow in the room. Nina sat beside me with a legal pad, calm and unreadable. I wore a simple dress and no jewelry except my wedding ring, which I hadn't yet taken off, not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted the room to see me as the reasonable one, the woman trying to survive, the mother trying to keep things stable. It wasn't theater for me, it was strategy. Vincent opened with a speech about fairness and moving forward. He talked about how he had built the business with his own hands. He said he wanted to do the right thing by me and Tyler. Then he slid the proposal across the table. It was insult dressed in polite language, a small monthly amount that wouldn't cover rent in our school district, no claim to the business, no claim to investments, no claim to the house, and a line about Alexis waiving future claims, written in the kind of language that tries to sound harmless while closing every door. Lorraine watched me with that same tight smile I'd seen in my kitchen, the smile of someone who expects obedience. Vincent leaned back and waited. This was the moment he thought I would explode. He wanted it. Men like Vincent feed on the performance of a woman's pain because it makes them feel powerful. If I cried, he could call me irrational. If I shouted, he could call me unstable. If I demanded fairness, he could call me greedy. So I didn't give him any of it. I took the papers, looked at them quietly, and said, I understand. Vincent's eyes flickered. He didn't like that. Nina asked a few questions, measured questions, the kind that sound harmless but force details into the light. Vincent answered vaguely. Lorraine interrupted. The mediator tried to smooth it over, and I sat there calm as a lake with a storm underneath. Because while Vincent believed he was negotiating terms, I was watching him reveal his urgency. His foot tapped under the table. His jaw tightened when Nina asked about certain accounts. He pushed for quick decisions. He wanted signatures. He wanted closure. That's the thing about people who are hiding something. They need the story to end before anyone turns the page. After the meeting, Vincent followed me into the hallway. "You see?" he said, voice low. "That wasn't so hard. Just sign and we can be done." I looked at him and kept my face neutral. "I'm thinking about Tyler," I said. Vincent's expression softened, not with care but with calculation. "Exactly," he said. "Tyler needs stability. Don't drag this out." He walked away thinking he'd planted the right seeds. At home, Tyler sat at the table, half-eaten cereal in front of him, staring at his phone like it held answers. He'd gotten quieter in the last month, less talkative, more careful. Children in divorce often start performing, trying to be good so they don't add more stress. It breaks your heart because you can see them shrinking to make room for adult drama. I sat down beside him and asked, "How was school?" He shrugged. "Fine." "Did Dad call?" Tyler hesitated. "He texted." I didn't ask what it said. I didn't want Tyler in the middle, but I could feel the tug-of-war happening around him. Vincent was buying affection, offering dinners and gifts like a salesman offering incentives. Lorraine was whispering narratives about who deserved what. Brittany was the shiny distraction, proof to Vincent that he could replace me like an old appliance. I made Tyler tea and watched him wrap his hands around the mug, small fingers clinging to warmth. That night, Nina called me. "I want you to understand the shape of the trap," she said. She explained that Vincent's strategy was common. He wanted the assets in his hands, the debts hidden or delayed. He wanted me to walk away with little so he could present himself as the one who kept everything because he earned it. He wanted speed because speed prevents scrutiny. "And what do we do?" I asked. Nina paused. "Sometimes," she said, "the best move is to give someone exactly what they demand, only in a way that makes the consequences theirs." That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. In the second mediation session, Nina shifted. Instead of pushing for the house, she asked questions about liabilities. She asked about loans, about personal guarantees, about tax obligations. Vincent dodged. Lorraine bristled. The mediator looked uncomfortable. Vincent leaned forward, smiling tightly. "We're not here to audit my business," he said. Nina smiled back, polite as porcelain. "We're here to understand the full marital estate," she said. "Assets and obligations." Vincent's smile cracked for a moment. Afterward, he called me, directly, which he hadn't done in weeks. "You're really going to do this?" he said, voice sharp. "You're going to embarrass me?" I kept my tone gentle. "I'm just trying to understand what I'm agreeing to," I said. He scoffed. "You always were dramatic." There it was again, the old pattern. Turn my caution into a flaw, turn my questions into an attack. And still, I didn't fight him. I let him talk. I let him believe he was still steering the ship. Meanwhile, Nina and Harold began building something I didn't fully understand at first because it sounded almost too simple. A paper structure. A settlement that granted Vincent what he demanded, control of the house, the vehicles, the company interests, while attaching to that control the legal responsibility for all connected liabilities. It wasn't a trick, it was a mirror. Because if Vincent's empire was as strong as he claimed, then taking the assets shouldn't frighten him. He should gladly accept the obligations that come with them. Responsible business owners do. But if Vincent's empire was a house of cards, then those obligations were the wind. Nina drafted the language carefully, the way a surgeon cuts. Precise, minimal, impossible to misinterpret. She included disclosures Vincent would be forced to sign off on. She included clauses that prevented him from later claiming ignorance. And she built it all around one idea. Vincent gets what he wants, and Vincent owns what he's been hiding. When she showed me the draft, my hands trembled slightly as I read it. Not because it was unfair, but because it was so final. It was a document that didn't ask Vincent to be decent. It simply required him to live with his own choices. "Will he sign it?" I asked. Nina's eyes were steady. "He will if he believes he's winning," she said. That was the hardest part for me, emotionally, because it meant I had to play the role he needed me to play. I had to look tired, cornered, eager to be done. I had to seem willing to accept less, to accept humiliation, to accept the narrative that I was the one being reasonable. I had to swallow my pride so he would reach for the bait with both hands. Older women understand this kind of acting. Many of us have spent our lives smoothing moments, keeping peace, letting someone else feel big so the household stays stable. We learn early that sometimes survival requires performance. But this time, the performance wasn't for a man's ego. It was for my son's future. So at the next meeting, when Vincent presented himself as magnanimous, I lowered my eyes and said softly, "I just want this over." Lorraine's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Vincent's mouth twitched with satisfaction. He thought he was watching me fold, and Nina slid the revised agreement across the table. Vincent skimmed it too quickly. He didn't read like someone cautious, he read like someone starving for victory. He saw that he was getting the house, the vehicles, the business interests. He saw the headlines he could tell his friends. He saw himself walking away as the winner. He didn't linger on the parts that mattered. Not yet. He tapped the page with his pen. "Finally," he said, "now we're talking." And in that moment, I understood something that will sound strange unless you've lived it. I wasn't afraid anymore, because the ending Vincent wanted, the one where I disappeared quietly, was already gone. All that remained was the moment when he would realize what he'd actually demanded. The morning of court was cold in that dry, colorless way winter mornings can be. Even when the sun is out, I remember standing in front of my bathroom mirror, smoothing my hair and looking at my own face as if I were meeting a stranger. I didn't look like the woman I used to be, not because I'd changed my style or lost weight or found some glamorous new me. I looked different because I was awake. For years, I lived half asleep inside Vincent's version of our life, the one where he was the builder and I was the helper, the one where his success was the only story worth telling. Now I was fully awake, and being awake comes with a certain quiet gravity. Tyler was still asleep when I left. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'll be back this afternoon." He stirred, but didn't open his eyes. Children know when something big is happening, even when you try to keep it soft around the edges. Nina met me outside the courthouse. She wore the same calm expression she always wore, as if emotions were something she acknowledged privately and never allowed to interfere with the work. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm steady," I said. And it was true. My stomach was tight, but my mind was clear. Inside, the courthouse smelled like old stone and tired air. There were rows of wooden benches where people sat holding folders, staring at the floor, waiting for their names to be called, people carrying their own private endings in paper form. Vincent was already there, standing near the courtroom doors like he owned the building. He looked sharp in a dark suit, hair perfectly styled, posture open and confident. Lorraine sat behind him, dressed as if she were attending a gala rather than a legal proceeding, her chin lifted in that familiar way. And Brittany was there too, a few feet away, perched like a decoration, pretty, young, bright. She kept checking her phone as if she needed something to anchor her. Vincent spotted me and smiled, that same smile he used at investor dinners. It wasn't warmth, it was performance. "Alexis," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "You look good. Ready to finally close this chapter?" I nodded politely. "Good morning," I said. He leaned closer, as if he were doing me a favor by lowering his voice. "Don't worry," he murmured. "This will be painless if you don't make it weird." Nina stepped slightly in front of me, not aggressively, just enough to remind him I wasn't alone. Vincent's attorney arrived, an older man with a slick confidence and a briefcase that looked expensive. He shook Vincent's hand, nodded at Lorraine, and barely looked at me. That was fine. Let them underestimate me. I'd learned the value of that. When we were called in, we took our places. The room was simple, judge's bench, flags, a seal on the wall, the quiet hum of fluorescent lighting. Nothing dramatic, no music, no slow-motion justice, just the sober machinery of law. The judge looked down at the paperwork, flipped through pages, and asked routine questions. Names, dates, confirmation that we understood we were ending our marriage, confirmation that the settlement was voluntary. Vincent answered smoothly. He sounded like a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed, calm, reasonable, slightly bored. I answered quietly, carefully. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Counsel, she said, glancing at Nina, anything further? Nina stood. No, Your Honor, she said. We're prepared to finalize. Vincent's attorney stood next, smiling like a man already thinking about lunch. Nothing further, Your Honor, he said. The judge looked back down at the agreement. All right, she said. Let's confirm signatures. A clerk passed documents. Pens clicked. Paper shifted. Vincent signed quickly, confidently, as if he were signing autographs. Lorraine watched with satisfaction, the corners of her mouth lifting like she'd finally watched someone get what they deserved. I signed slowly. Not theatrically, just carefully. The way you sign something that matters. When it was done, the clerk gathered the pages and handed them back to the judge. The judge flipped through again, eyes moving line by line, making sure everything was in order. And then, something changed. It was small at first, a pause that lasted half a second too long. The judge's eyes stopped on a page near the back. She turned it, then turned another. Her expression didn't become angry, but it became sharper, more focused, like someone noticing a detail most people skip. She looked up. Mr. Mercer, she said, addressing Vincent, I want to clarify something. Vincent's smile remained, but I saw the first flicker of irritation. Of course, Your Honor. The judge lifted a page. This agreement awards you sole interest in the marital residence, the vehicles, and the business entities listed, she said. It also assigns you sole responsibility for debts and liabilities associated with those assets, including business loans, personal guarantees, tax obligations, and any undisclosed lines of credit. Vincent blinked once. Yes, he said too quickly. The judge's gaze held him. You understand what that means? Vincent's attorney shifted slightly, the first sign he was truly paying attention. Your Honor, he began. This is a standard allocation. The judge held up a hand. I'm not asking you, she said evenly. I'm asking Mr. Mercer. Vincent swallowed. Yes, he said again, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. Then the judge did something that, to me, felt like a door opening. She said, Counsel, please come forward. Vincent's attorney stepped up, still wearing confidence like armor. Nina stepped up too, calm as ever. The judge pointed to a specific section near the back, an appendix, the part people don't read when they're eager to win. This portion, she said, lists obligations that appear substantial. Mr. Mercer is accepting them in full, is that correct? Vincent's attorney leaned in, his eyes scanned, and I watched his face tighten as he read. Then he leaned closer to Vincent and whispered 5 words. Just 5. I couldn't hear them, but I saw them land. Vincent's color drained as if someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He grabbed the papers with both hands, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, he looked unsure. What is this? He hissed under his breath, not quite quiet enough. His attorney's jaw worked. He kept his voice low, but his eyes had that look people get when they realize they've been handed a live wire. Vincent stared at the appendix again, flipping pages fast, frantic now, trying to find a way to make the words rearrange themselves. Lorraine leaned forward in her seat. Vincent? She whispered sharply. Brittany sat frozen, phone forgotten. The judge waited. She didn't rush. Judges have seen panic before. They don't fear it. Vincent's attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, he said, there may be some confusion about the scope of these liabilities. My client believed... The judge raised her eyebrows. Believed what? She asked. Vincent's mouth twitched. He forced himself to speak. Those numbers, that can't be right, he said. That's not, I didn't agree to that. Nina's voice was calm when she spoke. Your Honor, the language is explicit, she said. Mr. Mercer requested sole ownership of the assets. This allocation simply assigns the corresponding obligations accordingly. Vincent's attorney turned toward Nina with sudden anger. You buried this? He snapped. Nina didn't flinch. It's in the settlement, she replied, where both parties can read it. Vincent's eyes darted to me, wild with disbelief, and for a moment I saw what he'd always refused to see. I was not the quiet assistant anymore. I was the person who had finally read the fine print. Vincent stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, he said, voice rising. She did this to ruin me. She manipulated the agreement. I didn't know. The judge's tone stayed even, but it carried authority. Mr. Mercer, she said, you are represented by counsel. You signed this agreement. Are you telling the court you did not read what you signed? Vincent's throat bobbed. The judge looked down again, then back up. And I see here, she continued, a statement acknowledging you declined additional review and waived further audit or discovery beyond disclosures provided. Vincent's attorney's eyes widened slightly, like a man realizing the floor is gone beneath him. Vincent's lips parted, but no sound came out. Because that waiver was the lock on the door he'd tried to keep closed. He turned to his attorney and hissed, Fix this. But some things don't get fixed once they're on record. The judge set the papers down. Mr. Mercer, she said, this court is not here to rescue adults from their own signatures. If you want to contest the agreement, that's a separate matter requiring a legal basis beyond regret. Vincent looked like he might argue, but his attorney touched his arm, a quiet warning. Lorraine's face hardened into something close to panic. The judge's gavel hovered like a final punctuation mark. All right, she said. The settlement is accepted and entered. This marriage is dissolved as of today. That was it. No speech, no justice monologue, just a decision recorded in ink. Vincent sat down slowly, as if his legs had forgotten how to work. His attorney leaned in again, whispering urgently now, but the words didn't matter anymore. Lorraine stared forward, jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Brittany stood up, then sat down again, unsure whether she was supposed to be supportive or simply disappear. And me? I exhaled. Slowly, carefully, as if I'd been holding my breath for years, because the story Vincent tried to write, the one where he walked away clean and left me in the wreckage, had ended right there, in the space between 5 whispered words and a judge's signature. When we walked out of the courtroom, the hallway looked exactly the same as it had before. Same benches, same tired air, same people clutching folders like life preservers. That's one of the strangest things about big turning points. The world doesn't change its lighting for you. It doesn't pause and acknowledge what just happened. It just keeps moving. Vincent stumbled a little as he stepped into the hall, like a man who expected solid ground and found loose gravel. His attorney pulled him aside immediately, speaking fast and low, flipping through the settlement as if speed could reverse time. Lorraine rushed after them, heels clicking hard against the floor. What did you sign? She demanded, sharp enough to cut. Vincent's head snapped toward her. I signed what I was supposed to sign, he hissed. I signed what I thought. Lorraine's eyes flashed. Thought? You thought? Vincent, do you have any idea what this means? I didn't stay to listen. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. Nina touched my elbow gently. Let's go, she said. Outside, the cold air hit my lungs like a clean cloth. For a moment, I stood on the courthouse steps and simply breathed. Nina was already checking her phone. Lawyers don't get to linger in feelings. They move on to the next task. You did well, she said, not as praise, but as confirmation. I didn't do anything, I replied softly. Nina looked at me. You did exactly what you needed to do, she said. You stayed calm. You protected your son. That's doing something. I watched cars pass on the street. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Life continued. And yet, I knew the world inside Vincent's carefully built image was already collapsing. It didn't happen all at once. like a movie explosion. It happened the way financial collapse usually happens, quietly at first, then faster than anyone expects. Within a week, Vincent stopped calling Tyler as often. Not because he suddenly forgot he had a son, because he was busy scrambling. The lenders Harold had identified started sending notices with sharper language. Late payments became urgent demands. One missed payment became two. Two became a pattern. And patterns trigger consequences. A month after court, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that one of Vincent's projects had stalled because a line of credit was frozen. Contractors stopped showing up, work halted. When work halts, buyers get nervous. Investors get angry. Angry investors don't care about your charm at dinner. Vincent tried to keep up appearances. He still posted photos online, him in a suit, him in a nice restaurant, captions about hustle and mindset. But the tone changed. The confidence started to look strained, like a smile held too long. Lorraine began calling me. At first it was furious voicemails. "You set him up. This is evil. You're trying to destroy my son." Then, when rage didn't work, her tone shifted into something I recognized from years of watching her manage people. Sweetness. "Alexis," she said one afternoon when I finally answered, "I know things have been difficult, but we're family, and Tyler needs his father. Maybe we can talk about adjusting some things." Adjusting. As if the court order was a curtain hem, as if my son's stability was a favor they could renegotiate. "No," I said evenly. "We're done." Lorraine's voice tightened. "You're being stubborn." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I'd learned that Lorraine used stubborn the way some people use dangerous, a label for anyone who won't submit. Tyler heard the tail end of that call. He was standing near the doorway, pretending not to listen. Older kids become experts at pretending. "Grandma mad?" he asked quietly. "She's upset," I said. "Because Dad's in trouble?" he asked. I looked at my son and saw something painful and hopeful at the same time. His intelligence. Tyler was putting pieces together. He was realizing that his father's story didn't match reality. "I don't want you worrying about adult problems," I told him. Tyler nodded, but his eyes stayed serious. "He keeps saying you did this to him," he said. "But I don't know." I sat with him on the couch and turned my body toward him fully. "Tyler," I said, "I didn't create your dad's decisions. I didn't make him borrow money. I didn't make him hide things. I didn't make him lie. I only made sure you and I weren't crushed by the weight of what he was carrying." Tyler swallowed. "So he lied?" I paused, not because I wanted to protect Vincent, but because I wanted to protect Tyler's heart. A child deserves truth, but truth has to be delivered carefully, like medicine. "Your dad has been making choices that aren't honest," I said gently. "And sometimes when people get caught, they blame whoever is closest." Tyler looked down at his hands. "Brittany left?" he said suddenly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" Tyler shrugged. "Dad was yelling on the phone. Then she wasn't there anymore." I felt a small, distant sadness. Not for Vincent, but for the sheer predictability of it. Brittany wasn't in love with Vincent's character. She was in love with the image he sold. When the image cracked, the attraction evaporated. Over the next weeks, more news drifted in without me seeking it. Vincent listed one of the cars for sale, then another. The luxury watch disappeared from his wrist. He moved out of the private apartment. He started showing up to Tyler's school events looking tired, not triumphant. Then came the word, people fear, bankruptcy. Not immediately filed, not publicly announced with trumpets, just whispered by those who knew the business side. People like Vincent rarely say, "I'm drowning." They say, "I'm restructuring." They say, "I'm managing cash flow." They say, "It's a temporary setback," but debt doesn't care what you call it. It collects. One afternoon, Diane called. I almost didn't answer. After her hesitation on that earlier call, after the way she'd sounded like she was carrying someone else's message, I'd decided to keep my circle small. But I answered, because part of growing older is realizing you can still be kind without being vulnerable. "Alexis," Diane said, voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." I let the silence stretch. Diane filled it. "Vincent asked me to tell him things," she admitted. "He wanted to know what you were doing, what your lawyer was doing. I didn't want to, but he made it sound like it was for Tyler. And Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes. The betrayal didn't surprise me anymore. It just confirmed what I'd already learned. People often choose the side that feels powerful. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "Can you forgive me?" she whispered. I looked out the window at the street, at ordinary life happening with no awareness of my private war. "I'm not going to punish you," I said, "but I'm also not going back to the way things were." Diane sobbed softly. "He's falling apart," she said. "Lorraine is furious. They're saying you ruined him." "I didn't ruin him," I said, and my voice was calm, almost tired. I stopped letting him ruin me. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once balanced business receipts and made dinners and tried to be the peacekeeper, and I let myself feel something I hadn't allowed in a long time. Grief. Not grief for Vincent, the man he had become, but grief for the years I had given to the version of him I had believed in. Grief for the younger Alexis who thought love meant disappearing. Grief for Tyler, who had to learn too early that adults can be selfish. But grief didn't take me under. It passed through like weather, and on the other side was something steadier. Freedom. Over the following months, my life became quieter. Not easier right away. Quiet doesn't mean painless. There were still bills, still legal follow-ups, still co-parenting complications. But there was a difference. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't bracing for the next insult. I wasn't trying to interpret Vincent's moods like they were the climate. I found a small rental near Tyler's school. It wasn't large, but it was ours. I painted the kitchen a soft green, sage like calm made visible. The first night we ate dinner there, Tyler looked around and said, "It feels peaceful." I nodded, surprised by the sting in my eyes. "That's the point," I told him. I went back to work in a way I never had before. Not as someone's helper, not as the invisible engine behind a man's name. I took a course in interior design, something I'd loved in secret for years, something I'd always told myself was impractical. It turned out it wasn't impractical at all. It was simply mine. On weekends, Tyler and I built new routines, grocery shopping, cooking together, movie nights where we argued about what to watch and laughed like the world wasn't heavy. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed. Slowly, he started talking again. Vincent still came around, but he came around differently. Not like a king. Like a man learning, too late, that life invoices you for every lie. One afternoon, he showed up to drop Tyler off and lingered by the doorway. "You look good," he said. It sounded strange coming from him, like a compliment spoken in a language he didn't really know. "Tyler's doing well," I replied. Vincent's eyes flickered over the small apartment, simple furniture, clean counters, the sage green kitchen visible down the hall. He looked at it the way someone looks at a place they used to own but no longer has keys to. "I didn't think you could do this," he said quietly, almost to himself. I met his gaze. "That was your mistake," I said. He swallowed, and for a moment he looked like he might say something meaningful. An apology, a confession, something that would make the story neat. But neat endings are rare in real life. Vincent nodded once, turned, and left. After he drove away, Tyler came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "Mom," he said, "are we going to be okay? For real?" I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. He was getting taller, heavier, more like a young man every day, but in that moment he felt like the little boy who once fell asleep on my shoulder. "Yes," I said, and this time I believed it completely. For real. If you're watching this and you've lived long enough to know how quickly life can change, I want to say something plainly. Don't wait for someone else to be fair to you. Be wise on your own behalf. Read the papers, ask the questions, keep your footing. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do isn't to scream. Sometimes it's to stay calm long enough to see the truth. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I hope you and your family stay healthy, safe, and held by peace in the coming days. If this touched you, if it reminded you of something you've seen or lived, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next story.